This is our final session of the conference. Please remain on the line following the presentation for some closing instructions. We will have to do a survey. We always do. So, but right now I invite you to welcome Chancey Fleet. Chancey is a 2018-19 Data and Society Fellow and current affiliate in residence whose writing, organizing, and advocacy aims to catalyze critical inquiry into how cloud-connected accessibility tools benefit and harm, empower and expose communities of disability. Chancey is the Assistive Technology Coordinator at the New York Public Library, where she founded and maintains the Dimensions Project, a free, open lab for exploration and creation of accessible images, models, and data representations through tactile graphics, 3D models, and non-visual approaches to coding, CAD and visual arts. Chancey was recognized as a 2017 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. So welcome, Chancey. Thank you for sharing this with us today.
Thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. And I understand there's some really severe weather in Georgia, so I hope everybody's staying safe and I hope that passes soon. Thanks for letting me come and speak to you all this afternoon. It's great to be able to get to know you all virtually. I just wanted to put out an access note. I was a procrastinating preparer and I did not get my slides up in a timely fashion. And so I have a tiny URL. Anybody that needs real-time access to my slides, this is on me, this is not on Pat, but you can go to tinyurl.com/dimentionsgeorgia, all lowercase. Again, tinyurl.com/dimentionsgeorgia, so that you can access the slides in real time, because Pat was not given enough time by me to get them up onto the system just yet. So hi, my name's Chancey. As Pat said, I work for the New York Public Library. My home branch is the Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library. We are based in Manhattan in New York, except we're all working from home now. We're all working remotely. So we're part of the New York Public Library, and we're also a branch of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, which is a division of the Library of Congress. So we are really two libraries in one, and we serve the public, and that includes our sighted publics who are allies, who are educators, family members of blind and disabled people, folks working in museums and cultural access, government service, civil society, and then of course our core demographic is our Braille and talking book readers who identify as being blind, low vision, visually impaired. Some seniors don't identify with a disability at all, but they need a way to access print that's not standard print. Some folks have trouble holding a book because of disabilities like cerebral palsy or Parkinson's. And whatever your access needs may be, you can come to the Andrew Haskell Braille and Talking Book Library or any library under the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled umbrella and access Braille books and talking books. So my existing connection, my original connection with the library was as a library patron. So I identify as blind. My pronouns are she, her, and my preferred descriptor for my disability is blind, not low vision or visually impaired or anything else like that, because blind describes a rich way of perceiving and navigating the world and a community of practice that's really strong and wise. And so I look at my blindness as a core part of my identity and a positive part of my identity. So now that we've got that out of the way, I'm the Assistive Technology Coordinator, but I started as a volunteer back in 2010 because I noticed that when I was hanging out with my activist friends who are blind or visually impaired, we would be able to solve each other's technology problems really quickly and easily. Whereas people that weren't well connected to the community would often struggle for months or even years accomplishing a simple technology task. And we realized that we are each other's best strength and source of support. And so we started what was called the Computer Support Clinic. It sounds super dated now. As volunteers, we started just volunteering our time 3 hours a week on Saturdays, and blind, visually impaired, disabled folks and their allies could come in and get help from assistive technology users who are confident in the use of technology. And that's how I got started at the library. I got to join full-time as assistive technology coordinator in 2014. So the root of what I do is curating assistive technology in the branch and connecting library patrons with the mentorship and the support that they need to accomplish their technology goals. back in late 2016, I received a call from a very well-connected person in the blind community, and he had just moved to New York, and he wanted to know where he could get a 5-borough map. And I thought to myself, I have no idea. And what's more, why is this question so hard? Why is this a hard reference question? Any sighted person can just pick up their phone or go on a computer or print out a map, and they can have any map or any image that they desire within minutes. And in the blind community, we've had various technologies for experiencing images for decades, and I'm going to show you some of them today. But I realized most of us don't have access to the means of production for tactile graphics or raised line drawings, is a less technical way to say it. Usually the images that we are served are images that are selected because they're part of a test or they're part of somebody's education plan for us. And I realized that sighted people, for the most part, have control over the images that blind and visually impaired people experience. And I thought, we've got to do something to change this. And the library is the right place to do it because we can house the equipment. We have staff who can understand how to use it. And we're a place that's free and open to the public and values accessibility and where the community feels comfortable coming. So I started the Dimensions Project in 2017, in late 2017, and I'm going to go through the nuts and bolts a little bit more in a second. And right away, I started telling all my blind and visually impaired patrons, hey, guess what? You can come in and create any images that you need. And to my surprise, a lot of them said to me, well, why would I need images at all? And I realized that if you are deprived of something for long enough through your education, through your career, you're not going to demand it and you're not going to recognize its value. So the surprising biggest challenge in launching the Dimensions Project was to get people engaged in images. And sometimes that meant getting people engaged with very simple images like holiday cards or simple games, simple drawings. We've been around for 4 years now, including a virtual year where we've actually done co-design remotely and led DIY tactile drawing nights with household supplies. And we've sent out graphics to people who need them. And at this point, we're used by Blind New Yorkers, the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, New York Emergency Management, museums, cultural institutions, families, educators, artists, the works. When I was growing up, I never considered myself to have any aptitude in STEM, art, or design. And building and growing this lab has been, among other things that it's meant to other people, it's been a chance for me to reclaim parts of my mind that I never appreciated because I was never given the tools that match with my skills and strengths. So the message that I want to share with you and with blind people and our allies is that we learn not to be interested in STEM and design because we're missing out on mentorship, equipment, and non-visual representation of spatial concepts. The problem is never our aptitude or potential. The problem is avoidable image poverty that's perpetuated because the graphics equipment we need is mostly owned and used by sighted transcribers and educators who curate a very few images for our consumption. We need daily access to images to develop our spatial awareness, and we need direct access to the means of production. Designers can help by spending time on non-visual design, providing graphics and 3D representations ready to be embossed or printed, by providing meaningful written description of images on the web, and by imagining novel, affordable approaches to rendering spatial information non-visually. And librarians can help by creating a community of practice where non-visual approaches to spatial information are well respected and well understood. And I'm going to show you, you can do that on a big budget or a large budget. The most important thing you can do as an ally is to create opportunities for meaningful non-visual description, for tactile graphics production, for leveraging 3D printers. All those things kind of go hand in hand. And hold on one second, I'm going to change gears here. And I'm ready to go to the next slide, slide 2. At long last, after me just talking into the void. Okay. Here we are at slide 2. So I want to talk to you about building the Dimensions Lab, and everybody wants to know how we funded it, how we found the space, how we found the equipment. The space already existed. So we had 2 small training rooms where all of our tech coaching happens. So that space was already there. We just had to convert it into a mixed use space. The space where most of our Dimensions lab happens is tiny little submarine-like room, but we have units of shelving above, we've got a closet in the back, we've got space for 2 computers, and we've got space for an upright embosser and 2 3D printers. 2 or 3 people can work in there comfortably. And then we have the rest of our equipment is actually on a book cart, and it can go into other spaces that are flex use spaces. And it's important that most of the equipment is run in dedicated rooms, not out in the public reading room, because it can get loud and it's delicate. But we don't have a ton of space. We have a ton of mixed use space, and we just use every inch of that space that we can. We use a back office for storing some supplies that come out sometimes for programs, and we put a surprising amount of equipment, including an embosser and a 3D printer, on a movable book cart. We got our initial funding from the New York Public Library's Innovation Grant Program, which is a program for any employee that imagines themselves to have a good idea. And we were able to get $10,000, and that was enough to start us off with a 3D printer and a bunch of filament and an extended warranty for that first 3D printer, and some residual just in case funding in case we should need to get extra parts or solve a problem. Snowballing off of that Dimensions, of that innovation grant, the New York State Commission for the Blind gave us a donation in kind of our first tactile graphics embosser, which is the Index Everest. And again, it was super important to get an extended warranty with that. And we needed to get some software called Tactile View. Tactile View is the world's only GUI CAD software that I'm aware of that's fully accessible, which means a blind person can go in and say, hey, I want to draw a circle, and define the coordinates of that circle and the size, and put texture in, put infill. Blind person can also bring in an image and convert it to a line drawing, or convert it to black and white so that it's less cluttered. We can build lines, we can build shapes. Now we can do this with code, we can do this with SVG, but the average blind person on the average day is not trying to learn SVG just so that they can do some drawing. So Tactile View, it's really important that it's an accessible software, and that was several $100s. So the New York State Commission for the Blind were convinced that we were onto something, that we could put this equipment in a central location where it would be used by educators, by students, by professionals, by culture workers. And so they made an investment in kind of the dream that we had. And once we had secured the innovation grant funding, the commission was happy to provide us with the additional support that we needed to get an embosser and a warranty and training on how to use the embosser. And in addition to running the lab, I go out and my colleagues go out and give lots of talks like this one, and sometimes donations happen. So we ended up getting a donation of 2 additional 3D printers. They're Ultimakers. They were loaned to us on kind of a long-term loan because we were running a 3D printing weekend intensive workshop, and we've gotten to keep them. And we've also gotten a donation of a bunch of 3Doodler pens. I'm going to be showing you those later, from the maker of 3Doodler, and he also came and led workshops on how a blind person can accessibly use a 3Doodler. Over the years, we've got donations of expertise and time from community partners. So there's an organization called DIYability, which is in New York and does toy hacking and other projects for people with disabilities. And the DIYability folks will come out for workshops and partner with blind people, and they will even lead workshops. They've come and led some Arduino and physical computing workshops that tie into our tactile graphics work. And they've also just sent people out to help set up 3D printers and help troubleshoot, because when I started all this, I didn't know anything about 3D printers or really about embossers. And so it was important to have mentorship to scaffold the blind staff and get the blind staff to a place where we could run the lab independently. We've got community partners at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. You're going to see some work from them later. Again, they just show up and make stuff happen and design stuff and make stuff work. And we've gotten lots and lots of other community partners over the years. Sometimes it's a long-term partnership. We've had somebody that's done a web development curriculum for us and a curriculum for OpenSCAD, which is how a blind person can use code to design 3-dimensional objects. And sometimes it's a short-term partnership. So we have the folks from Verizon Media come to a volunteer day with us each year. And last year we just did a photo describe-a-thon where folks could come in with their phone photo rolls and get a sighted volunteer to help them generate meaningful descriptions so that they could more fully appreciate the photos on their phones or delete the ones that they didn't want to have anymore. So we really rely on a lot of community partnership and not a lot of budget, folks. Our day-to-day operations are handled by our existing staff and volunteer tech coaches. So there's me, there's 2 part-timers, we're all blind or visually impaired, and that's it for the paid staff in the technology department. And we have a cadre of about a dozen volunteers, some sighted, most blind. And a few of those volunteers have learned to use all the equipment that I'm about to show you in the Dimensions Lab. So we're running the Dimensions Lab in addition to doing about 160 hours of tech coaching per month. Mind you, it's all happening remotely right now. I have half of this equipment in my house and I'm able to co-design and mail things out to people who need them. And then we're doing all of our tech coaching pretty much on Zoom or on the phone. So we don't have a huge staff and we don't have a dedicated staff person for Dimensions. We just shoehorn it in around the other work that we do. And we rely on having a lot of donated expertise and a lot of volunteers. All access to our equipment and our workshops is free of charge, except if you have a big print job, we will charge you for paper. And if you have a big 3D printing job, we'll ask you to BYOF, bring your own filament. Of course, we make exceptions for people that don't have the budget to do that, but use of all of our materials and supplies is free. Our equipment, that is free by appointment. We do require that people make appointments because we have to do a very delicate dance to choreograph people doing Dimensions work and people doing tech coaching work and group workshops meeting, and we just have to play a little bit of library Tetris. So everything happens by appointment, and that includes independent project time for people to come in and make whatever they want, and I'll be showing you some examples in a second. And it also includes group workshops. So we have 3 group workshops that we run. One of them is called Tactile Tactics. It's just basically best practices for making a tactile graphic. We teach people that tactile graphics need to be appropriately labeled with concise Braille. They need to be scaled up. They need to be decluttered. And we try to show just 1 or 2 layers of information on a sheet because Braille is pretty big. It would be 29-point font if it were print. So you have to be strategic about how much Braille you portray on a page, and also tactile acuity is lower than visual resolution. So our embosser does about 100 dots per inch, and that approaches the edge of what the average human being can perceive by touch. So we teach all those best practices or good practices. I won't say our practices are the best, but they're good practices for tactile graphics. And then we do an orientation to the nuts and bolts of using embossers and using tactile view, and I'll be showing you some examples of that later. And then we do a nuts and bolts orientation to using 3D printers accessibly as a blind person or as a sighted ally. So we can go to slide 3 now. So I'm going to show you some key components of our lab. So if you want to do anything like this work, here are some things that you may consider. So we've got tactile graphics embossers. These produce standard Braille and 100 dots per inch graphics. They permit the creation of booklets, business cards, and all kinds of other media types. So we have one embosser that's tractor feed. That's the View Plus Columbia, and that is Mr. Reliable. You can just print pages and pages of Braille unattended, but you're stuck using tractor feed paper. The Index Everest, which is the first embosser we received, is Mr. Versatile. It can handle all kinds of paper, including cardstock, Avery labels, adhesive paper, you name it. But gosh, you have to baby that thing. You do not leave it unattended unless you want a spectacular printer jam. So we just really consider what the type of project is and choose our embosser wisely. Our embossers both permit inner point embossing. Both sides of the page can be embossed if you're doing Braille rather than graphics. And again, folks, this is super important. Braille is already huge at 29 points. We really need both sides of the paper or it's a massive waste of trees. These embossers can produce a full page graphic up to tabloid size in 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the dot density. So the more dots that are getting punched, the more dense the graphic is, the longer it's going to take to pop out. but a page of standard Braille is going to take a minute or less. And that sounds like a long time, but believe me, the technology has been slower before than it is today. Our embossers support up to 8 distinct dot heights, but when they're adjacent to each other, they do not feel very distinct. So we recommend that most people only use 3 or 4 dot heights in their designs, but dot heights are a way to make shading happen. And embossers need to be run in a dedicated area with a closing door. They are loud. They will make library patrons upset if library patrons in the reading room can hear them. So it's really important that this equipment be housed in a dedicated space. And as always, it's important to budget for an extended warranty. Embossers, like printers, are fantastic and fantastically delicate. So that's just something to bear in mind. Next slide, please. And I think that next slide is just a picture of 2 embossers. So we have the tractor feed embosser, which is the VP Columbia. And then we have our fickle friend, the Index Everest, which is the one that can deal with all kinds of fancy paper types, but does like to jam. All right, let's go to the next slide. It's about the swell form machine. So this is a super cool machine. Probably unlike anything you've ever seen unless you work in the field already. So it raises carbon-based ink, any carbon-based ink, so you can use a regular printer or you can draw by hand, on special microcapsule paper, and you then run it through this machine, and inside the machine there's a heated light, and it brings a bold tactile dimension to high contrast images, which means it's great for low vision people who might get something out of the visual part of a graphic. And it's also super for mixed groups of people, blind and sighted people that maybe want to experience the same thing together. So it can incorporate ink and raise. It runs extremely quietly and it's extremely compact. So it doesn't necessarily need to be in a dedicated area, and it's not super fragile. I think it's fragile on par with like an average printer or scanner. It creates smoother images because it's lines, not dots, right? So way smoother and more continuous images, but then embossing. So people really sometimes fall in love with the quality of the tactile line, but it's less distinct when it comes to Braille than embosser. So you would never want to print lots of pages of just straight Braille. This is really mostly for graphics. It's great for raising hand-drawn images. So if you've got a library patron who wants absolutely nothing to do with the computer, you know that library patron, they're artsy and creative and they do not want to do anything on the computer. They don't want to do anything with CAD. They just want to draw. So it's great for raising hand-drawn images because you can use any carbon-based pen or marker as you like. The downside, though, is that paper is expensive for paper. It's about $1 a sheet, so the charges can run up quick. We usually give people a few free sheets to start out with. We recommend that they really just economize. If you're going to do a small drawing, use half the sheet, and then it is $1 a sheet. I'm so sorry to say. Worth it, though. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, which should say 3D printers at the top. 3D printers are ideal in a lot of ways. You may already have a 3D printer in your library makerspace. They're used by sighted people, and they're coming down in price. You can get a home 3D printer for just a few $100s now. The ones that we have a Lulzbot Taz 6 and we have an Ultimaker. And 3D prints are amazing for conveying to a blind or visually impaired person 360-degree reality of a thing. When the thing is in its original too small, too large, let's say too small like a molecule, too large like an elephant, too delicate like anything in our rare books collection I'll be showing you from later, too dangerous like a bumblebee, too far away like, I don't know, Neil Armstrong's footprint on the moon, which is something I've seen 3D printed, or too abstract to touch, like a mathematical or geometric concept. 3D prints are really great for that. 3D printers are capable of making very detailed high resolution models in a range of different colors and material types. They are not ideal for Braille really, or simple relief images. There's no reason to do a raised line map with a 3D printer unless it's going to be in a public space and you need it to be durable, because 3D printing is a slow process, people. A pair of tactile dice take 40 minutes. Tiny little tactile dice take 40 minutes to print. Large models can take upwards of 12 hours, and our library is not even open for 12 hours at a stretch. So when we weren't in pandemic times and I didn't have the 3D printer here in my home office, we were limited in terms of what we could do with the 3D printer by the time that the library is open, and we had to choreograph that very carefully and ask people with long projects to come early in the morning, or we would start things out on their behalf. We chose our 3D printers based on versatility, build volume, user replaceable parts, warranty, and most importantly, accessibility of the hardware. We cannot buy a 3D printer that has a touchscreen because blind people can't use a touchscreen unless it's a self-voicing touchscreen like the iPhone has. So we looked for simple controls. We also looked for open construction. So although a 3D printer runs really hot, it runs about 210 degrees Celsius, which I think is up in the 400s Fahrenheit. A careful blind person can bring their arm in, find the top of the printer head away from the hot end, away from the extruder, and gently, gently, gently follow the progress of the 3D printing head. And so it was important to us to find 3D printers that had open construction so you can monitor them effectively as a blind person after getting the appropriate safety demonstration and training. All right, next slide, please. Now we get to see some 3D printers. This is me and my colleague Willa, super excitedly beaming down at the Lulzbot Taz 6 that we purchased shortly after we finally assembled it. And we also have here a lovely rocktopus. It's an octopus that's green, giving the rock sign, which is the test print that they send when they send you a Lulzbot Taz 6, because they're awesome. You can see that the open construction, you can see that the build volume is very large. You can get a pretty big model there. You can see that some of the parts on the Lulzbot itself are themselves 3D printing. And you have the ability to replace any of the parts that you see here. You can swap out the extruders, and they have awesome support and an awesome warranty. So we did a lot of research, as library workers must, to make sure that we would have something sustainable. And I'm really happy with this choice. And then the Ultimakers that we have were donated. All right, next slide. Not everything has to be super expensive. These are some analog tools for affordable, creative, tactile exploration. And I'm going to tell you about 4 of them. My colleague Maxwell created this 3D doodler start. That is a chunky little pen that prints with low temperature, non-toxic filament. It was originally developed for small children because you can't hurt yourself with this thing. You can literally draw on your hand and it'll feel pleasantly warm, like a warm summer's day, but you will not get burned, and there's nothing toxic about it. And we discovered that as blind people who want to check our work in progress and really monitor our work with our extra hand while we're drawing, the 3Doodler Start is an awesome way to do that safely. And it's also a great thing to have around for library patrons, because you don't have to worry about any special kind of safety instructions. And the pen itself, I want to say it's less than $50, and a pack of filament is a few dollars. It's, filament does add up, but this has been the source of many, many joyful library programs where people can either do tactile drawing on paper, or they can even build things in 3 dimensions. So pictured here is the 3Doodler Start, and somebody's made a 3-dimensional robot. That was not somebody from our library. That's a very neat looking robot, and I don't know if we've done anything that cool, but it's a great way to build things out in 3 dimensions and talk about working in 3 dimensions, and also just a really creative tool that's good for all ages. We have a tactile drafting tablet. This was another donation in kind from Easy LLC. And Easy LLC makes this tablet. You basically use plasticized paper. It costs about $1/4 a sheet, so less than the swell form. And then you clamp the plasticized paper into this magnetic frame, and there's a stylus there, And if you've ever gotten a piece of your clothing hooked on something and you've unintentionally raised a line or like a snag, this is the benevolent version of that. So the stylus gets into the grooves of the plasticized paper and raises a very bold, assertive, beautiful, tactile line. A lot of people use this for math and science. We can use it for doing our own drawings. The tablet itself costs a couple $100s, but it makes really, really high quality images. I can't say enough nice things about it. And they also ship it with a little hot iron so that you can sort of smooth paper out and somewhat erase your mistakes. Although, like any eraser, it's not going to be foolproof. It's still an analog tool. This is also a big hit with people that don't like to use computers, people with multiple impairments. It's a hit with educators, anybody that wants to be artistic. We're really happy to have this. If you don't have the budget for one of these, though, never fear, you could invest in a few sensational blackboards. Sensational blackboards come in a notebook size, which is $35, and an 8.5 by 11 size, which is $50. And they are extremely simple. They are nothing but a plastic backing and then a rubberized layer. And you put the rubberized layer under regular paper. You draw with regular paper, whatever paper you have. I've just got my notebook here. And you use a regular pen. And when you draw with a regular pen with a firm hand, it actually kind of scores and raises a line. Or you can use thicker paper, draw, and then when you flip it over, you've got a really bold mirror image. So this sensational blackboard tends not to make images that are super long lasting because it's kind of tearing the paper. But it's a great way to doodle. And there's no extra investment after you pick up the sensational blackboard for $35 or $50. We eventually invested, I think, in 10 of the small ones for library programs so that people can just gather together and do drawing together. And they're also available for people to just come and use in the branch. But a lot of our library patrons end up buying their own because they're so simple and so inexpensive. Can't say enough nice things about the sensational blackboard. It's definitely helped my drawing over the years. And lastly, you've got to be able to measure. So we have a tactile caliper. We got our tactile caliper from the National Braille Press. And it's just a standard caliper that has measurements of 1/16 of an inch. And they pop up in mechanical refreshable Braille. So this was pretty inexpensive, and it's just a great, invaluable thing to have around if you're going to be doing any kind of analog design. If you're curious, there's also an N-gauge Bluetooth digital caliper, which gives much finer readings, and we can just connect that to someone's iPhone or their Android device or any Bluetooth device, and that's becomes fully accessible if you need a really accurate caliper. All right. On to the next slide, please. So this is the beginning of my kind of show and tell through checking how I'm doing on time, and I'm doing okay. Kind of funny talking into the void when it's a Zoom webinar. I'm used to library workshops. In our library workshops, the audience is loud, even online. So this is our NYC 5-borough map. Remember the gentleman that called me and said that he was moving to New York City and needed a 5-borough map? Well, we got it. One of our community partners, Naomi Rosenberg at the Lighthouse in San Francisco, was kind enough to do this for us. And she's a sighted person who doesn't necessarily even know Braille. Maybe she does, but she doesn't need to because she works in Illustrator, a fairly standard program. You may have it at your library. If not, you could use something like Inkscape, which is free. And she uses the Braille 29 font to add Braille annotations. And notice that the 5-borough map is scaled up. It's simple. It has one job, and its job is to tell you about the boroughs of New York City and the waterways. Its job is not to communicate elevation or political affiliation or population or anything else like that. We would put each individual layer of information, if we were portraying those things, on a separate map. So when it comes to tactile graphics, remember folks, clutter is the enemy and scaling up and simplicity are your friends. So this 5-borough map does exactly what the gentleman wanted it to do, give a geographical overview, and we have this now available to print out. It can either be embossed or done in swell form for any library patron who's interested in it. If we could go to the next slide, please, that would be lovely. And thank you so much for doing that, by the way. My hands are down here reading Braille and reading my notes, and I'm really happy I'm not having to pop back up to PowerPoint and keep smacking that space bar. So this is one of the most beautiful things in the world. This is tactile map automated production, TMAP. And it has been embossed. And what this does, the TMAP service, which is hosted at the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco, is you go to a website. By the way, anybody can Google TMAP and go sign up for a free account. If you've already got an embosser or a 3D printer or a swell form machine, go get your free account. This is available to anybody. So you go to the TMAP, Tactile Map Automated Production website, and you put in any street address in the world, and you put in a preferred scale, and you put in a preferred paper size, and boom. TMAP uses OpenStreetMaps data to instantly create an elegant, simple, Braille labeled map. The map shows you how streets relate to each other. It's got a little circle for you are here. It has a north pointing indicator. And notice it has Braille on the edges so that when you're following the streets, you're not getting distracted by any Braille in the middle. You follow a street to its edge, and there you find the Braille. Notice that the Braille is really concise. It's usually only a couple letters. And so then you know, if I see W74 on a separate page, there's a key or a legend, and it'll say W74 equals West 74th Street. You can put in any point of interest, any place. I'm moving to a new neighborhood soon, and I'm so excited to have my TMAP because when I move into my new house, I'm going to understand how all the streets work together. And when there's a really challenging intersection, if you're from New York or if you know New York, Columbus Circle has always been kind of a mystery to me. But once I see it from the aerial view, from the proverbial bird's eye view, by hand, I'm able to understand that intersection and be a lot more confident. Again, we send these out to any library branches that want them, and any library patron can come in and print out as many TMAPs as they want, and the service is free through the Lighthouse for the Blind at San Francisco. And what's nice about TMAP is you don't have to do a lot of design labor. This is something that a blind person can come in and generate independently with no intercession from a third party. Next slide, please. Okay, so remember before when I said that we were so excited to start the Dimensions project, and library patrons kind of said to me, well, why should I care? Why do I need images? This is one of the things that we devised to kind of tempt library patrons to care about embossing in images. We found the library worker in the branch who has the neatest handwriting of everyone. Thanks, Kaylee. We will always remember you. And she created these cursive letters in upper and lowercase, the uppercase connected to the lower. And we can emboss these or swell form them. And we also have another series not pictured here that's just standard print. Because one thing that almost every blind person wants is neater handwriting, better signature, including me. So when somebody said that they didn't care about images and we couldn't tempt them with a map and we couldn't tempt them with art, almost everybody wanted one of these cursive alphabets to go home and practice with. And then they might use the sensational blackboard to practice their handwriting and check out their results using raised lines. So one of the most important things and challenging things that I had to learn through the course of this project is the importance of meeting patrons where they are and not pushing patrons to try to care about things that they don't in fact care about, and just keep proposing and providing things until you find something that lands, and this landed really well. Okay, let's go to the next one, content warning. It's going to be COVID content. I'm sorry, folks. This is a flattening the curve drawing. This was done for us last March by Naomi. Again, it was designed in Illustrator, and I think pictured here I have the swell form version. This graphic was all over the news. It was all over social media. Everybody was discussing it, but it felt very abstract to me as a blind person, and I know it felt abstract to lots of other blind people. So Naomi created this. And I was able to get access to this information about how social distancing and hand washing and other measures could flatten the curve and lengthen the curve. The catch is our embosser at that time was in the library and the whole world shut down. So what do you do when the whole world shuts down? I mean, I grabbed an embosser and I brought it home, but we didn't know yet how long we had to quarantine print, so I couldn't send anything out to people. What do you do when you're trying to reach library patrons and other blind folks, and you know that they've got no specialized equipment at home? Well, what Naomi did is she created a mirror image version of this graphic on the website of the Lighthouse for the Blind, and she gave detailed instructions for how sighted people could trace the mirror image using a firm pen over a mouse pad or a wooden cutting board or any other kind of semi-soft surface that they might have in their house. And then they would flip it over and the tactile graphic would be there. So this just goes to show, even if you don't have a lot of equipment, even if you don't have a lot of budget, even if you don't have a lot of space, you can think of something to make graphics more accessible. And that's what Naomi did. So these were reproduced with photogrammetry. We don't have the photogrammetry machine in our branch. We are not that fancy, but the main flagship New York Public Library does have it. It's like a fancy turntable where you capture everything from every angle. And we have in our, sorry, lost my thought. Happens once in every Zoom. If the thought fairies would bring my thought back. Yes, okay. So we have in our rare books division these Sumerian cuneiform from 2,000 or 3,000 BC. People are super not allowed to touch these. They're very delicate and very valuable. And I always read about cuneiform when I was growing up in history books, and I imagined that they would be these big tablets like Moses coming down from the mountain type thing. Nope, they fit in the palm of your hand, and I know that now thanks to photogrammetry. So we captured the tablets from every angle, and I am able to explore them, and our library patrons are able to explore them. We have a minds-on, hands-on classroom kit that goes out to classrooms of sighted and blind kids, and it contains these cuneiform. It contains the cast of E.E. Cummings' hand that for some reason we have in the branch, and lots of other things that you're not allowed to touch the original. I don't know how I feel about touching the cast of E.E. Cummings' hands. I'm not sure that that's an accessible experience that I necessarily wanted to have, but I'm sure happy that it was available to me. And so those classroom kits can be used for blind and sighted kids. So this is a time when tactile graphics or 3D printing is actually fun, I think, for everyone, whether you have sight or not. Next slide, please. This is the amazing colorless color wheel. So as a blind person, many of us as blind people, many of us want to understand contrast and want to understand colors for the purpose of web development. We offered last quarter, we offered a web development, HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript class. And people have to understand colors conceptually, even if we don't use color ourselves. So our community partner, Claire, created this one, and it shows the relationship between primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Again, notice the very concise Braille labeling, and notice that the lines and shapes are very well differentiated. And this was a tool. By then, we knew that we needed to quarantine Braille materials for 96 hours. So we are able to send these actually all over the country to what became a nationwide web development workshop for blind and visually impaired people who read Braille and read tactile graphics. So that was super exciting to be able to do some dimensions work even while we couldn't physically be together and touch the same things in common. Next slide. Our community partner, Lauren, created this continuity tester schematic on swell form paper. So Lauren started hanging out at the Dimensions Lab a few years ago and ultimately decided to do her master's thesis on tactile graphics. You can check out her full flight of accessible tactile graphics to support physical computing at tactileschematics.com. She did such an amazing job with this, and you can learn all the fundamentals of physical computing by embossing or swell forming her work, tactileschematics.com. And again, that's Dimensions work that lives on. Even during the pandemic, we can't physically be together, but because of the fruits of her labor, any blind or visually impaired person or ally can go and check that out. Next slide, please. So remember how I said that not everybody likes to use computers and that we have some really artsy people that prefer to hand draw. Tony Cruz is one of those people. He goes by Ram2, and he is a prominent street artist living in the South Bronx. and his vision is going away. So he hand drew this graffiti on swell form paper. I believe this is the one that says NYPL, we are triumphant patrons, patience and fortitude. And we've got a train, which is one of his signatures. So he didn't just do this for himself. He did this, mind you, in about a minute. He's an amazing, quick artist. He made about 20 of these and took them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art as part of a program there where he's teaching graffiti style art to blind and visually impaired people. And what is graffiti? It's bold. It's often black and white. It's uncluttered. It's got strong lines. And so it's perfect. It's perfect for the medium of tactile graphics. Okay, let's go to the next slide. No relation, graffiti, G-R-A-P-H-I-T-I. This is a dynamic tactile display that we have in the branch. And it lets us, it's very low res, very proof of concept. It's just 60 pixels by 40 pixels. But you can zoom in and observe what's happening on a computer screen in real time. We have this prototype. It actually arrived during the pandemic, so we will be debuting it to our library public as soon as we're able to open and also touch things in common again. But this is a way to observe your drawings in real time without being able to see the screen. So right now, this is the closest thing we have to a dynamic tactile display. I just want to shout out, next slide please, a couple things that any library branch can do in terms of getting access to spatial information. And you can turn these into library programs if you want, or you can just do them as a good practice at your library. You can do DIY video description. You can sync your homemade description with any YouTube video, and there's no copy wrong because it gets played, your description gets played in a separate track, so you're leaving the original alone in place. Parallel tracks leave the original video unaltered, and the description can play while the action happens, or you can use something called extended description, which pauses the video while you say the detailed description that you want to say. So go hit it up. It's youdescribe.org. You can create a free account. Another year that the Verizon folks came, they did a YouDescribe-a-thon, and we've had a few successful Describe-a-thons over the years where library patrons, blind and sighted, come work together to create funny or touching or moving or informational video descriptions. And this is something that costs you nothing. You already have a computer. Your library patrons are already going to YouTube, so you can make things more accessible by going to youdescribe.org. It is such a fun library program for teens or for adults. Next slide, please. Alt text, simple written descriptions for the web. So we should all be using alt text on our social media. So you can Google alt text Facebook, alt text Twitter, alt text Instagram, and you should also be doing it on the web and in any of your internal materials. Keep your alt text brief. Most pictures aren't really worth 1,000 words. Most people don't want to read a 1,000-word description for a picture. Consider the purpose. What story does the image tell? And be precise. Convey the major themes and trends in charts and graphs. And I have here a link. You can just Google alt text Twitter, or you can go to this long link if you downloaded my slides. And you can start out right now adding alt text to your social media. And you can also make alt text the subject of a library program. My friend Shannon Finnegan does a great program called Alt Text as Poetry. You can find that online. And doing community education or patron education or doing collaborative alt text can be super, super fun, especially if you pick a fun subject. Like maybe you're going to do an afternoon of describing comic books or an afternoon of describing Lego instructions, or you can do something a little less challenging, maybe an afternoon of describing things that are in one of your collections. And that can really drive a library program. And again, it doesn't cost you anything to do that. Just a quick clarification. Next slide, please. People often think that AI these days can describe images, but when the image is complicated, like the ones I just mentioned, or when it has some emotional cultural resonance, the AI is going to miss that. So when you hear Facebook and Twitter and others saying that they do automatic image recognition, don't take that as a license to stop doing alt text, because just like automated transcripts aren't as good as the real thing, automated image description often leaves a lot out. So use it with caution. Next slide, please. Another thing you can do in your library with your library patrons is play with sonification. This is data as rhythm and music. So for example, to help people understand COVID trends, stock trends, any of that, I use the SAS Graphics Accelerator, and we did a couple kind of nerdy library programs about this, including a couple of them during the pandemic. So it's a Chrome extension, it's free, and accepts any like big data set, like a CSV, and tones rise in pitch as values rise, and stereo panning from left to right marks the passage of time. Tones can play continuously, or you can move in the set just with your arrow keys at your own pace. And text-to-speech complements those tones with precise data values. It's free, no special equipment required. Stereo headphones recommended though. So if you're looking to do an accessible pandemic virtual program, this is a nerdier thing. You've got to have intermediate tech skills to be able to use this, but it's a way to get audiographs into people's homes with no special equipment and no budget. And there is the big long link. If you don't want to go to the big long link, just go to SAS Graphics Accelerator. Just Google that and you'll get right there. Don't worry about it. And then I also have a link there for the music of the yield curve. The Financial Times did another example of good sonification. Next slide, and I think final slide. I'm sure looking forward to listening to some questions and not just hearing my own voice. Images are for everyone. We can use all of these techniques from high budget to no budget to make image poverty a thing of the past and to introduce library patrons with all levels of vision and our allies to the beauty and richness of tactile media. It is not a text-only world. Lend your design skills and your librarianship skills to beautiful, legible, tactile designs. Alt text and describe your work. Imagine novel, affordable ways to convey images and data through touch and sound. Design not for us, but with us. And that's my spiel. Thank you for your time. I would love to take some questions.
Thank you, Chancey. Great information. I'm scanning. This is Asha Haygood from Glass. Scanning our chat and Q&A areas for questions. I'm not seeing any just yet. You can also raise your hand if you would like to verbally
I am the
ask
last
your question.
session of the day. I know it's hard out there.
We have had an information-packed 3 days.
Oh, I bet.
But it's been great.
If you don't want to think of any questions now, or if you're at the end of your Zoom rope, you can always reach out to me. I'm Chancey Fleet on Twitter. I don't know if you want to go back to the very first slide where my contact information is. I should have put that at the end again. No, you didn't. But you can email me and tweet at me if you have questions.
Yeah, we have all of the presenters' contact information, and that'll be
awesome.
provided to all the participants.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
There is a question, do you ever have any patron-led programs? If so, how did you connect with them to lead programs for the library?
We do have patron-led programs. So a lot of our library, a lot of our tech coaches are volunteers, and some of them do lead workshops. So the staff and volunteers get together once a quarter for what I call the pitch meeting. I like to think I'm a little madman or something, I don't know. And anybody can propose a workshop, and then we have a vigorous debate about whether the workshop's a good idea or not. And if people think it's a good idea, they say that they want to help. And then the staff and the library volunteers, the patrons, work together to come up with an outline, and that outline includes like timestamps for everything. And then we provide the facility support. We provide the room setup, we do publicity, and we are there in case the library patron needs any support or runs into difficulties. Oftentimes we work together, so it might be me, another staff member, one or two volunteers presenting a 90-minute program. And this year has actually been great for us in that way. We've developed a more national and global following. So Pre-pandemic, I would say our average tech coaching workshop, which might be about anything, it could be about physical computing, could be about social networking, could be resume building, could be blind photography, could be a new app. The average workshop got maybe 5 to 10 patrons, and a really hot one would get maybe 30. During the pandemic, the average workshop, on the low end, we have 20, 25 people, and on the high end, it's over 100 now. So that's been really great for our volunteers who might be looking for work or might be wanting to build their networks, great for their visibility, and great for our community in a time that's been so hard for so many people. I think it's been fun for a lot of our patrons to meet blind and visually impaired and disabled folks from all over the world and really build something cool together. So.
Certainly, certainly. Okay, I'm still scanning. Pretty sure that the participants see Pat's note asking that you please don't leave early because we do have an evaluation that we want to.
You got to have your metrics. You got to have your surveys.
Yeah. So there's that. But just lots of feedback on your presentation, Chancey. Great information that you presented.
Oh, thank you
and
so
they're
much.
excited about going to checking out the resources that you shared.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
I do see one more question, Asha, that you missed. Do you ever conduct surveys to get an idea of what patrons want in terms of products and resources? And if so, how often?
So we often do a follow-up survey after an intensive. So we tend not to send out a survey just after a regular workshop, a one-off workshop. But we ran the web development workshop was eight weeks last year, and we ran a 3D printing workshop that was 4 sessions each. We ran that a couple of times, and we did surveys following up on those, just asking people what they found helpful and what they didn't find helpful and how the pacing was and that kind of thing. We also do, I won't call it a survey, but when it's about to be time for that pitch meeting that I mentioned, we just send out to our mailing list. We've grown our mailing list to something over 500. Is that right? Yeah, I think about 500 people now. And we send out just a note that says, workshop suggestions. If there's a workshop you'd like to see us run, if you'd like to make a suggestion, please let us know. We send that out a few days before the pitch meeting, and then we bring patron ideas into the pitch meeting and try to grant as many workshop wishes as we can within reason.
Well, thank you so much. We're right at 3:30, and Chancey, we do appreciate your presentation. You gave us a lot to think about. I posted in the comments a link to all the libraries in Georgia that do have maker spaces, because it's very important to know we've got a lot of them in Georgia, and this is just another way that you can use that equipment and think about an audience that you might not have reached.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.